Hey there, art nerds. Today we are easily influenced by Amaryllis Henderson, who you might better recognize as Watercolor Devo. So I first became aware of her work on Instagram. She has bright, brilliant, beautiful, and very translucent, very luminous watercolors that really just make my brain go burr. So today we're going to be taking a look at her expressive little faces. We're going to be taking a look at her expressive little animals. We're going to be taking a look at her collaboration with Peerless, the Expressive Face Tones pack, and we're also going to be taking a look at Peerless's Sidekick today. Before we get too deep into this, I want to point out Amaryllis and I don't know each other. We've never had any communication. She doesn't know I bought these. She doesn't know I am reviewing these. Reviews are for consumers to help you guys decide if these books and this palette are a good fit for you. I purchased these with funds from my Patreon. If you like what I do and you want to support the Easily Influenced series, you can join me at patreon.com/natosoup. And if you are new here and you don't know who I am, hi, hello, welcome. I'm Becca Hilburn. I am a watercolor comic artist, art educator, and I have been reviewing art supplies for over 10 years. Almost 10 years of those have been here on YouTube. So I've been doing this for a while. All opinions are my own. This is not personal, and I am using my experiences as somebody who has a Master's of Fine Art in Sequential Art from SCAD. That actually does bring quite a lot of experience with it. My experience, who has a BA in art from the University of New Orleans, that also has some experience with it. My work as a convention artist for over 10 years, that is a boatload of experience. My work as a comic artist and illustrator for even longer, that has a crazy amount of experience with it, as well as the reviews that I have done in the past to kind of help me gauge how these paints handle and how they behave. Of course, I am human. My opinion may differ from your opinion. We may like different things. We may dislike different things. You are free to share your opinions and your experiences down in the comments below. I encourage you to do so. In fact, the only rule here in terms of the comments is let's be respectful to one another and no hate speech. Those are the only comments that I will delete, are just bigoted, transphobic, homophobic comments. Those are absolutely not welcome here. But if you can play nice and be respectful to others, hi, you are so welcome here. I hope you enjoyed today's review. I hope you find it helpful, useful, and informative. So let's start talking about expressive little faces, expressive little animals, and expressive face tones. Hey there, art nerds. Today we're going to be talking about Amaryllis Henderson's drawing and painting expressive little faces. You guys might be more familiar with her as Watercolor Devo, and she is a SCAD grad with a degree in illustration from like 2003. So generally, I will say I don't have any kind of relationship, association, or affiliation with the people that I'm reviewing. But I am also a SCAD grad in sequential art, 2012, I believe. And another interesting fact, her married last name is Henderson, and my dad was actually adopted by his stepfather, and his original name was David Henderson. So, and she's from Texas, and my dad was originally from like Corpus Christi, Texas. So part of me wonders if in some strange way I might actually be related to her husband through my dad. So I just thought that was like kind of neat and an interesting thing, because I don't actually know any of my dad's father's family, like at all. I hardly know any of his mom's family, but I definitely don't know any of his dad's family. So who knows? Anyway, we're going to be talking about her two books, Expressive Little Faces and Expressive Little Animals. Not today, but in general. And we're also going to be taking a look at her collaboration with Peerless Watercolors. So regardless of whether we are secretly, distantly, sort of kind of related by marriage or not, we don't know each other. We've never interacted. I thought I would represent today. She's from Texas. I'm from Louisiana. That makes us kind of sort of neighbors. So I've got a little bit of Louisiana rep going on. And I'm really excited to talk about this book because in general, I really like this book, which has been a refreshing breath of fresh air because I have read a lot of how-to art instruction books that I didn't really feel succeeded in their task. And I do feel like Expressive Little Faces does succeed in its task for the most part. Now, as always, I've got a whole bunch of notes because I always have a lot to say. So this is going to be another super long video in the Easily Influenced series. And my goal for reading this one is, first off, we both are illustrators. I am a comic artist. She is an illustrator. We have had very different career trajectories. We have seen very different levels of success, but in the end, we both draw a lot of expressive little faces. So we have that in common. One of my most popular classes is Manga Madness, which is about drawing faces, particularly expressionate faces, faces that are very emotive. And as a comic artist, that is our bread and butter. So if there is one thing I feel I do well, it's drawing really expressive characters because I myself am a pretty expressive person. And I use my comics and my characters to help convey topics and themes that I may have difficulty conveying in a day-to-day setting. So I felt like we have a lot of shared ground in terms of drawing faces and in terms of drawing a lot of expressions, and that being like the big selling point of our work. I didn't realize she was a fellow SCAD grad until I started reading this book, and I happened to flip to the back where we have our about the artist somewhere back here. Maybe it's in the front of the book on this one. It's somewhere in here, and I am sure I will find it at some point. And first off, I'm really happy that she disclosed her education because we have encountered in this series a lot of artists who did go to school, but they're claiming to be self-taught. So I appreciate that she was honest about that. It's in the About the Author at the end. Savannah College of Art and Design, and began illustrating books and publications in 2003. So she's got about 10 years on me for that. This is a Quarry book that is an imprint of Quattro, and I have had kind of mixed results with our Quarry/Quattro books. Some are better than others. Some have better design sense than others. Some make better use of the space than others. And this is definitely one of the books where I feel like she made really good use of her space. In general, I find this book to be well laid out, easy to read, and it has a table of contents, which I really appreciate. And this one is very easy to parse compared to some of the table of contents we've seen. On page 9, we're just going to start talking about the book in the nitty gritty. On page 9, she says, "I know why you picked up this book." Bless her. No, but also yes. I bought this book to compare approaches, but yes, I also love expressive, emotive people with stories. On page 10, she mentions you've likely seen the books or received instruction that teach the value of an onslaught of pencil lines. We call that portraiture. I would argue that we also call that comics or illustration. Different people learn different ways, and construction or the ability to consistently draw a character is really important for some of us. Constructive anatomy has a variety of uses. She also mentions that while portraits tell us what we see, faces can describe who the person is. My argument was like, that onslaught of construction can do this too, you know. So a little bit of context. In a past life, I was a convention commission artist. Some of you guys might know me from that past life. Most of my money came from doing quick fire portrait commissions that were filled at the convention. And my most popular option was the ink chibis. So it was like very much a caricature. And it was really important for me to be able to do that underdrawing in blue lead and then ink on top of it and be able to fill that in about an hour, best case scenario, because often my customers would just lurk at the table and nag me until it was finished. So For some artists, that onslaught of constructive drawings is the reason we can consistently capture a likeness through a migraine, through a very busy convention, while being intensely distracted while serving customers. So like different approaches can appeal to different people. And maybe I'm getting defensive because for me, if it weren't for that, I have my ears are like not the same height. So like my glasses are always catawampus. Some people need those lines, some people don't. Some people don't have the luxury of drawing at home and being able to just go with the flow and getting in a flow state. Some people need those constructive lines to help them actually see what they're drawing. So like she acts like that's not her approach. It kind of is her approach, and maybe not as much as mine, but like if that's what you need, there's nothing wrong with that. On page 11, she shows us a shot of her very clean white studio with like no art on the wall, and it looks like a Dreambox commercial. I bring this up because on Threads, there's been a lot of chatter about people wanting to see people's real grungy art gremlin studios, and I am peak grungy art gremlin studio. So it just shows like how many sketchbooks she's filled. It doesn't even really give you an idea of like her creative space or how she goes about finding inspiration. I actually like the loose personality little faces she complains. I actually like the loose personality filled little faces she creates. Just like don't knock construction if it doesn't work for you, because it works for some people. On page 14, she talks about proportions and personality. Is she going to recommend using reference to create a mental library of features and faces? I ask myself, ever so hopeful, knowing at this point that she is a SCAD grad, and that is something they actually teach us how to do, at least in CEQA. They taught us how to do that. On page 15, she said, I draw pretty faces from magazines, ... So like, okay, she kind of mentions using reference, but not as much as I would like. She mentions being interested in animation before illustration. That explains the interest in faces. Storytellers love faces and hands. That does so much of our storytelling. So many of these influential artists earn a living doing surface design. How do they get into art licensing? Was one of my questions. Now, a lot of these books do mention art licensing as an option, but they don't really talk about how to get into it, how to put a portfolio together for that. And many of them are also, I don't think she is, but many of them are also selling like classes on art licensing, which I would rather just the book myself. So on page 18, she mentions a favorite brand by name, Magello Mission Gold, and she mentions the fugitivity of liquid watercolor and how it's not as important when you're working for reproduction. And this is a point I bring up a lot with using dye-based watercolors, is if you are a comic artist and your end goal is a published book and you're not selling originals, it may not bother you that they're going to fade. So I bought the Peerless Watercolor Collaboration because of Amaryllis, and she does mention them, but as a super fleeting aside, if you can collaborate with them, why not dedicate more space to actually talking about these watercolors, how you utilize them, what you like about them, how to make the best use of them? Because in the past, when I've tried Peerless watercolors, I struggled with them and I didn't like them, but clearly she can put them to good use, and I'd like to know how. On page 25, she talks about watercolor paper and why cardstock won't work. Yup. And acknowledges the need for cheaper paces and gives recommendations. And I have to say, great job. We have read so many of these books where they don't want to talk about the papers in specifics or give explanations, which I find leaves a less experienced watercolor artist kind of in the dark. On page 29, she talks about simplifying the face. So she mentions where are the darkest darks and what can I not afford to glaze over? And I say, as a fellow portrait artist who also does portrait commissions, basically yes. When I do portraits and commissions, I find the essential person. What makes that person that person? What elements can we absolutely not afford to glaze over? What elements can we not afford to overlook? Often it's the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the hairstyle goes a long way. Plus distinctive features like moles, freckles, maybe their eyebrows. She brings up good points, but she needs examples to help illustrate. She mentions that she'll go into it, but the examples would be helpful here and would help get readers excited for what's coming up. Now, I myself need to do more drawing faces videos and studies. It's something I used to do a lot, and I've kind of slacked off on it. On page 31, she mentions that photographs are likely the first step in shedding intimidation when painting faces. And as someone who has some degree of aphantasia, I don't have a photographic memory. I do work from photo reference pretty frequently so that I can help capture likeness. When I do commissions, I prefer to work from photos because I have a weak visual memory. Now, I did skip to the back at this point, and she lists some of her resources and inspiration. I have to say, good on her. While we were at SCAD, we were constantly told that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And what that means is we can only be the artists that we are because of the artists who came before us, who influenced us, who taught us, who shared their resources, who shared their information, so that we're not basically like cave people trying to carve things into the wall and only being able to create stick figures. We learn from the artists who come from before us. And that's one of the reasons I get real ranty about the whole self-taught artist myth, is we are all learning from other artists. None of us are making all of this up ourselves whole cloth. So I do appreciate her mentioning that and kind of normalizing that and demystifying that. And I have an entire rant about it. I don't have a problem at all. I love people who are on a self-directed art education journey, utilizing the internet and books and whatever classes they can pick up. My problem is not that. It's just the terminology that I hate. I do think listing more of these inspirations and references and resources, especially throughout the book, would be great. But this is a step above a lot of the books that I've reviewed. Also, if you don't get to the book, the back of the book about the artist, you wouldn't know that she went to SCAD, and you wouldn't realize that a lot of this is what's commonly taught at SCAD, which good on her for sharing her art education with other people and making it more accessible. That's something we have in common, but I disclose that up front so that you know where I'm getting my information from and to help demystify the art creation and art education process. And I mentioned at this point that she was a fellow SCAD grad, she was illustration, and I am CEQA. I wonder who she took for anatomy, and if we had the same professor. We'll probably have a similar background for face construction. Okay, I might be biased now. We share a common educational background, and I might be liable to go easy on her, so I'm going to try to remain fair. That's why I kind of brought it up at the top, because since we do share that background, and I learned a lot about drawing people and faces while I was at SCAD, I know that might bias me a little bit in her favor. So if you have a different art educational background and you found this book to be not very helpful, I am kind of curious about your experiences down in the description below. And keep in mind, we can all learn from different methods. Different people need different things. So on page 33, she mentions the facial proportions, the construction lines that she didn't seem to be a super big fan of. And to be fair, these are an area a lot of people really struggle with. Before I went to SCAD, I spent a lot of my time learning through books like Andrew Loomis and Glenn Vilppu, and I would copy the exercises and take notes and find reference and try to apply that. And it was really hard for me to remember and memorize and internalize, and I needed in-person classes. And I'd had a 4-year art education degree under my belt before that, and they didn't do a very good job of teaching anatomy or perspective. It took for me, different people learn differently, it took going through a master's program and doing a lot of really intense study and being surrounded by other people who, at the end of the day, care about telling stories, care about drawing people, and care about drawing places for it to finally click. So different people do need different things, and this is something that is intensely helpful to me, but I really needed in-person guidance and education to be able to internalize it. So on page 33, I made the note, I thought she was going to avoid all those lines. I use those lines, so obviously I think they're useful. This takes practice, but it's worth knowing these guidelines, I promise. Her version is simplified. A lot of how to draw books cover more, but it's still more in-depth than Jane Davenport's Beautiful Faces. Now on page 47, she has an exercise called Fruity Face. You can also take a foam head, and it got picked up. It was like right behind me. But those wig heads, you can take a wig form or a mannequin head or use a doll head and do a little bit more if you want a more accurate. I think this is her trying to get us to cartoon this, and that's wonderful. But you can, if you want something more realistic, you can use a doll head or a wig form head. And I'm going to go ahead and include a clip from some of my tutorials just as an example, just to show the different approaches. You can go a lot more in depth if you're looking for a more realistic, or you want to cartoon in a different direction, or you're not going to be working from reference, or you're trying to capture the same likeness or the same character over and over again. Having more construction and figuring out where everything goes consistently can be very helpful. On page 38, she talks about symmetry is important, but symmetry is a myth. Yes, and I underline it. The whole, like, with your eyebrows is a common example. They're sisters, not twins. I like to take that approach to drawing faces as well. The two halves of the face are sisters, not identical twins, like with one of my ears apparently being higher up than the other. So on page 39, she has some key takeaways. Can you believe that you know how to use proper facial proportions, angle those faces as they move, and single out what matters most? She asks us. I say no. No, I can't. If your readers are like I was, they need exercises and practice to internalize this information. This was very briefly touched on, and I hope she revisits it and builds on it throughout the book. Now, the back of the book promises use photos to simplify the face's key elements, learn about facial proportions and factors and variables for placing facial features. So far, we have one example, kind of how to do that. 39 pages in. So far, this book needs more examples and demos to build those fundamentals. I can say that, but on page 41, we go into building a face. Amaryllis goes into basic face shapes, and I'm not sure if pizza face on page 43 is meant as a thought exercise, a sketchbook or digital exercise, or like a cooking exercise. It is cute though. Her ear and chin demo on page 44 and 45 are both cute and fairly straightforward. This is more drawing in watercolor, but you could also sub out this blocking in approach with marker, gouache, or acrylic. And I bring this up because this book promises explore watercolor inks, markers, and more. Not as much as you would think. On page 46, she talks about creating eyes. This at least we're getting some graphite in there. So many examples and a reference to cartoonists. Good job. I wish she would have listed some specific cartoonists that she admires and gone into. She does talk about an illustrator from the 1900s, Amedeo Modigliani. Apologies, I have no Italian. And he was an oil painter. But we have all these examples of cartoon eyes and no reference to like Tex Avery or like Hayao Miyazaki or like the 9 Old Men. Come on, man. Give some nerd rep up in here, please. Citing more contemporary or living artists by name would be great here. It's a good step-by-step for a straightforward, and I mean straightforward as in looking straightforward, like for the most part, not from the side, but also like straightforward as in basic and simple. So good step-by-step instructions on a very straightforward eye. On page 48 and 49, she has a demo, nice and large, so you can actually see what's going on how to draw eyes. And this, she finally brings up another medium, this time it being graphite, and she writes her steps in writing that actually explain the steps you're seeing. And I have to point this out because like Jenna Rainey's Everyday Watercolor, I failed colossally at that task. And there was another one I read after that one, not Hello Watercolor. Maybe some of the Jane Davenport ones, probably some of the Jane Davenport ones, just don't do a good job explaining their steps at all. It's like they expect you to be a mind reader. So I love the large visual steps and demonstration. On page 50 and 51, she uses eyebrows to convey expression. A++. Eyebrows are so useful for adding nuance to expression. I don't want to go over the whole book in this granularity, but so far I'm becoming a little bit more impressed in her approach to drawing faces, especially compared to Davenport's beautiful faces, where I kind of got the impression that if it wasn't interesting to her, she just wasn't going to talk about it. On page 54 and 55, she gives a demo on how to draw more feminized versus more masculinized. Very helpful for breaking down those features and kind of explaining the differences. At the end of the eye lesson on page 57, she brings it back to those little faces that she first mentioned on page 45 and simplifies it. And I really like that she's like tying it back together. That's when teaching, that is so helpful. She talks about noses on page 58. A lot of people struggle with noses, so this section on simplification with large examples, like these here, hard to see, but we're going to do a flip through, is very helpful. On page 63, the 3D pyramidal graphic to help illustrate the form is a great touch. It really simplifies it and makes it easier to internalize and easier to remember. Her nose section gave me some new ideas on handling noses that I want to revisit. So that's a high compliment. Okay, I'm not the best artist ever, but we have a similar art education background and similar influences, and we probably read a lot of the same things. So if she can come up with something that helps me think about a feature of the face that I draw all the time differently, that's huge praise. Like, drawing faces is my bread and butter, and I was able to learn something from her. That's fantastic. On page 60, she talks about mouths. I feel like Amaryllis does a better job teaching the illustrated face than Jane Davenport does in Beautiful Faces. And we have this cute little mouth illustration right here. On page 71, I wrote that Joseph pointed out to me that there's some empty space and asked if it's for sketching. I felt like it could be help. I wasn't feeling well, so I was just reading and taking notes. And he came in to bring me some coffee, which is very sweet of him. And he noticed how much blank space is on these pages and was like, "Oh, is that for you to practice?" And I was like, you know, it could be. It could also be for taking notes. Some of these art books feel like they have to be so text dense and not do the illustrations large enough or leave enough space for you to really kind of see what's going on. So I really don't have a problem with the white space that's left on the paper. Everything doesn't have to be totally filled up, so long as the illustrations and the text do a good job of conveying what we're going for here. And she also provided lots of mouth examples, which I really appreciate, because not all of us are going to be drawing just women, which I know I'm fairly guilty of, but you know, working on that. And not everybody's face is the exact same face. So I appreciate her showing some diversity there. On page, she's got like a lot of mouth examples, which I really appreciate. And she actually talks about different ways of constructing the mouth and drawing the open mouth. Like, if you want to actually draw expressive little faces, this is a decent little starting point. So she, on page 75, and these definitely look like they were drawn from photos, she mentions working from photo ref for studies and tries to get us to think about what we're drawing. A+++++. Yes, that is that art school education at work, the getting to that more analytical level of not just copying what you see, not just step 1, step 2, step 3, do what I do, but getting people to think about the world around them so they can draw it in their own art style. I like that she provides both black and white line art demos and watercolor demos, which are also applicable to markers, although she doesn't really mention that explicitly. I feel, I might have missed it, but I don't think she mentions it explicitly, and she doesn't actually show those demos. And I bring this up because the front of the book says, explore watercolors, inks, markers, and more. And I think you do have to be a little more explicit if you're going to claim all those things. On page 82, we are drawing hair. So she has all these sections and she does a pretty good job breaking things down and explaining things discreetly and then tying it back together. So on page 83, she says, hair is always stylized. It just depends on which form of stylization or level of simplicity you choose. Yes, I will often refer to it as cartooning. Cartooning and stylization are often synonymous, but yes, maybe I should use the word stylization instead of cartooning because people just don't treat cartooning very well. Take inspiration from mid-century cartoons. Yes, but she doesn't give us any recommendations. And mid-century cartoons are really cool, and they have a lot of really cool stylization, and Hanna-Barbera was doing some really cool things, and UPA was particularly doing some really cool things. And then if you look at like mid-century Soviet cartoons, those are doing some really cool things. And some of the Japanese mid-century stuff is also really cool. Like, we have such a rich world. Give them something to start Googling. Give them something to look up, especially if they're new to this. On page 85, in fact, there used to be a really, really good blog, and I don't remember its name, and I'm so sorry. This is from the dinosaur age of the art blogs that just talked about how awesome retro cartoon art styles were. And I'm never going to remember the name, but it was a huge influence on me, and I'm so sorry that I don't remember the name. It was great, and I wish I could point you guys in that direction because it was hugely influential on me. Oh, you know, if you are interested in cartooning, the famous artist cartooning course, or it might be the great artist editing, Becca will correct it. So that's out of print. And you can find, it was like a monthly subscription service that taught so many really great artists and illustrators how to draw. So people would collect the pamphlets, right? And it was kind of a deal before the age of the internet and free how to draw content. It's out of print. I know there have been talks about bringing it back into print the way they did Loomis, but I haven't found it. You can buy complete sets for like $500, or you can read the PDFs, which is what I did when I was teaching myself how to draw utilizing these resources from the internet way back in the day. I will try to remember to link them, but they're a great cartooning resource. And one of the beautiful things is many of those books have entire segments, chapters, monthly updates written by innovative and famous cartoonists and animators at the time. So I'll try to remember to link that for you guys. I'm always going to push comics and cartoons at you guys. Spoiler. So on page 85, she has a great tip for painting gray or pastel hair. That's actually something that I really struggle with. She recommends using your lines as your comb and leaving a lot of the white, which makes sense instead of doing that base layer underneath. So on page 88 and 89, she talks about building a hairstyle. Breaks the hair down into zones. I use this technique as well. It's not necessarily a SCAD thing though, but it is a cartooning and animation thing. That's where I picked that technique up from, and I would bet that's where she picked it up too. She shows how to block paint hair, but not how to draw it. It is easier to think of hair as a mask, but not everyone is going to be doing this kind of block painting filling in. I kind of feel like she must be pretty dang good at gouache, because a lot of gouache is about like doing that blocking in first and then adding in the details later. Flipping through, this book isn't all projects. There's a lot of demos and explanation, and I really like that. I feel like projects have their place for like reinforcing skills and also building confidence, but they don't always actually teach you how to do things or even how to think about making art so that you can make your own art. On page 95, she has a segment called Putting It All Together. So far, this book has a good combo of new images, big demos, and good instruction. It's well laid out and attractive. On page 102, we have some mixes for natural skin tones. And I've already marked it up. I'm going to be revisiting this section. On page 103, we have a quick color guide for mixing skin tones. Some interesting mixes that differ from mine and would be fun to try out. So if you're looking for more on mixing skin tones, I actually did a big live stream where I demonstrate how I mix a variety of skin tones. So we have different approaches and it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Hers are more saturated and maybe even a little bit more cartoony. Mine lean a little bit more realistic because we have just very different cartooning and illustration styles. So I'll try to remember to link that for you guys. But I have a whole playlist on how to draw and paint people. So if you like my art and you would like to learn how I go about making it, you can check that out. I also made the note that maybe she's using the Peerless watercolors for these because they have that very dye-based kind of watercolor look. On page 109, she finally mentions using Peerless again. You know, the company she's got to collab with because she uses it so often. On page 112, she finally has another face exercise. And this is like tying the whole face together. So not just drawing individual facial features. And then on 119, she has a section on pumping up personality. She talks about capturing a likeness. It would be helpful to mention resources for references that you can utilize. I feel like she dropped the ball there. Come on. I know some of those change from time to time. Some of them go down. Sometimes the owners do some pretty egregious stuff, but there's also some pretty solid ones that don't do awful things that you could recommend. On page 122, she shows us some expressions. And I made the note that honestly, in a book called Expressive Little Faces, diversity and expression should get more pages. It really did not get a whole lot of space. And it is something she's very good at doing. So I don't know why she didn't spend more time talking about how to build different expressions, how to draw these things. There are a lot of really good resources online, but she's not citing outside references too much, outside resources too much. So she kind of leaves you dependent on her and her approach, which is not uncommon with these art books. Maybe her editor directed her in that direction, but it is kind of frustrating. She needs more explanation on how to create these expressions. What does she do to morph the face? Does she utilize squash and stretch, which is there's a lot of great techniques from animation that should be used if you want to draw expressive little faces, if you want to draw cartoony little people, if you want to do stylized stuff. There is a lot from animation that you should be borrowing. There's the Animator's Bible, which is really good. And then there's like a Watson and Guptill book that was done by like a golden age of animation animator. The name is escaping me right now. That is supposedly super good. I was never able to find it out in the wild. And then of course the famous artist cartoonist course, great resources for drawing expressive little faces that probably should have been mentioned. So she should be mentioning like squash and stretch, deformation, utilizing the eyebrows, mouth, and hair for expression. Like if you guys have ever seen the Ghibli floof, where the character is upset or super happy or super excited. And that's a technique that I utilize a lot. I happen to really love it. That would all be a good starting place. On page 133, she talks about not just doodles, aka surface design, aka art licensing. And she has some ideas on what you can do with your newfound skills like urban sketching, like face focused projects, personalized cards and gifts, like face-filled work. A lot of these a lot of these influential artists and art influencers, their bread and butter seems to come from like licensing deals and art licensing. And a lot of their books touch on it, but they don't really talk about it a lot. Like she mentions animators, storyboarders, comic book artists, and graphic novelists. Graphic novelists and comic book artists are the same thing. Coming from a comic artist. Some people, I say that because like some people use the term graphic novel to like distance from comics, and it's often not comic people doing that. It's often librarians, teachers, people who want to like somehow elevate the art form. It's like calling animation something different. It's all the same thing. It's all sequential art and storytelling. I don't really mind her dividing it. This isn't really about her, although she went to SCAD, so she should know. But it's the same stuff. Somebody who makes graphic novels could also make comics, could also make zines, could also make ash cans, could also do sketchbooks. All the same. Got distracted. The ADHD. Animators, storyboarders, comic book artists, and graphic novelists take the skill level up a notch with consistent drawings that tell the story in even more frames and drawings. I do appreciate the shout out at the very end of the book after not referencing any of us. She also talks about editorial illustration, but she doesn't give you any. Okay, so you don't really like need a formal art background or formal art school or training to be a comic artist. Lots of comic artists don't. Nothing absolutely wrong with that. You do need some comic friends who are also drawing comics. That tends to help. I say that as someone who has been drawing comics since she was 13 and didn't have any comic friends until late in undergrad. It's lonely, and you don't improve when you don't have any friends. But you don't need formal training to make comics. You could start making comics today. You don't even have to be good at drawing to make comics. And I know this because I teach comic classes to all kinds of people. And I'm always talking about XKCD, which uses stick figures to make comics. They are consistent stick figures and emotive little stick figures, but they are stick figures. But anyway, my point was that she doesn't really talk about. I feel like this is kind of a wasted section. Like you should be talking about these people and citing some of them as inspirations by name throughout the book. Yeah. But like to mention at the end as just like, oh yeah, by the way, you can also be doing these kinds of things without giving any kind of like advice on how to do those things or how to get started is kind of like a weird addition that I see in a lot of these books. Like, it's not as easy as waking up one morning, posting on Instagram, getting discovered by an agent, and you're done. Like, it's not as easy as that. And the landscape, and I'm speaking as a comic artist, the landscape of getting your foot in the door has changed significantly from going to New York Comic Con and handing out minis to having a robust social media presence where you're consistently posting art and a personality that works well on camera, and being young and possibly gullible enough to kill yourself working to death for pennies on the dollar. Like, the landscape has changed, and it is challenging to talk about it, which is why I don't do any of those kind of videos at this point. It changes all the time, and it is challenging to talk about it. But to just like mention it in passing feels like a little half-baked, and a lot of them do that. So it kind of was like on page 141. For someone who finds inspiration in animation and illustration, she lists very few favorite face artists. A few more would be great. I'm going to list who she mentions because she calls it a few favorite face artists. She mentions Al Hirschfeld. She mentions Chuck Close. And she mentions Andy Warhol, which it's like, I thought he was like a screen printer and a designer. I thought he worked a lot from photographs and other people's work that he may or may not have used without their consent and without crediting them and without paying them. So like, how's he a face artist? But like a few more face artists would have been great. including more Disney artists like Mary Blair, Glenn Keane, the Nine Old Men, etc., and even some Archie, because she mentions liking Archie comics in this book, mentioning some Archie comics artists who were particularly good at drawing those expressive little faces would have been helpful, or giving a shout out to some of the comic artists that she likes would be helpful. I am always trying to champion for comics because I love comics and I really believe in comics, and I feel like a lot of the videos I do, I am rattling off comic artist names, and I feel like they should be listing who they find inspiring for you. It shouldn't be my job as the reviewer to fill in the gaps. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I am also an art educator and I am passionate about comics. And I hate how people think comics is just like an art form for children. There are some wonderful comics for kids and teenagers, and there's some wonderful comics for adults. And the only reason I rack my brain to think of creators who you guys might enjoy is because these books should be listing their references, should be listing their resources, should be listing their inspirations. And they really dropped the ball. So if you are not familiar with comics and you don't have a preteen or teenage child in your house, I really think you should check out Raina Telgemeier's work for expressive and very simplified little faces. Her art is very cute and it's very charming, and she's able to capture a lot of expression with very few lines. And I think that might be hugely aspirational for a lot of artists. I will forever mention Kiyohiko Azuma and Yotsuba being a favorite of mine. He draws extremely charming cartoony faces that, especially in Yotsuba, that can really convey a whole lot. If you don't mind crude humor, Crayon Shin-chan has these really cartoony, stylized, expressive faces that are just so much fun to look at. And then, of course, I am doing my best to create expressive little faces all the time, every day. So you might want to take a look. Natasha Alighieri, the creator of Being Puppy Cat, also has some very charming, expressive little faces. And Ian, oh my gosh, it's the creator of Craig of the Creek, and he also did Art PG World. Ian Quarterly, and then there is another name there. Editing Becca will help me. I'm not good for names for people I have never met in person. First of all, RPG World had some really charming, expressive little faces in a goofy little art style, but that is an older webcomic. You may have trouble finding it. Craig of the Creek has some really charming, goofy, expressive, diverse faces in it. Now, those are comics and cartoons, and if you look down on comics and cartoons, my recs are you should try it. Try it. Be brave. You got this. Let go of your bias and check some of those things out. I challenge you to do that. If you think of yourself as an artist, if you are watching this review because of this book, you can watch those things. You can do it. I believe in you. She does have a helpful index. I do think this book is a great inspiration for artists who already can draw faces, or as an addition to other books on faces, particularly cartooning books on faces. But it isn't a standalone and probably isn't meant to be. There's a lot about watercolor in this book, but very little about any other media, save for a little bit about graphite in the beginning. So I do like this book. I do recommend this book. I think part of me getting frustrated about the lack of referencing other artists, the lack of citing inspirations comes from, I think this would be a great book if she did that. And I see a lot of unspoken stigma against cartoony artists, comic artists, and animators. Our work is treated as derivative. It is not really considered art because it's a commercial art. And I kind of feel like she's trying to distance herself from being considered one of those. And I get it. I get a rebrand, okay? I get a subtle reframing of what you do to appeal to a different audience and maybe get them to give you a chance. I do get that, and I don't really blame her for that, but she is in a position to champion for the inspirations and the references and the resources that inspired her work and helped her get to where she's at. And by not giving them those shout outs, not giving them those flowers, she's just further obfuscating that. So I like the book. I think it could be better if she referenced some of her inspirations, and I challenge her if she's watching this. We don't know each other. But I challenge her, if she is watching this, to please spend a day on Instagram, maybe do a carousel or a 9 grid of your top 9 cartoon and comic inspirations and list those creators out. I challenge you to do that. You have the platform, you have the power, you have the audience to help make a difference, whereas I don't. So if you're watching this, I would love to see that from you. I would love to see who you're inspired by. I would have so much respect for you. That is like a boss move right there, because you can help change minds and you can help change attitudes, and you can introduce your fans to a broader world that I think they will genuinely love if you will just introduce it to them. So that's my little challenge for Amaryllis Henderson. I figure she's not watching this. Please don't go out of your way to send her this. Like, that's not what that was about. But sometimes people do watch my videos, so like, why not offer like a friendly little challenge? And if you do that, I will happily list 9 fine art artists or graphic designers who I am inspired by and who I enjoy. It's going to be a much more modern list probably, because I'm much more inspired by some of the stuff I'm seeing on Instagram, but I will happily take that challenge in return if she takes my challenge. So I did enjoy the book. I do actually recommend it. It's not quite a standalone. I don't think she's promising for it to be a standalone. It's not promising to be the ultimate beginner's guide or anything like that. I do think she should have covered the other media, literally listed on the cover in more depth. And I do think she actually should have shown how to draw from photos more than just like a sidebar exercise, because the back of the book promises that. And that might just be like on the editorial team and not really on her. But that is an area that I think a lot of beginner artists are very interested in. They want to learn how to capture a likeness of a friend, a family member, themselves. And I think if you're going to make a book on it, that's a good area to really talk about and to show some various techniques for doing that. So I will see you guys when we are talking about expressive little animals. And then we're going to talk about her collaboration with Peerless Watercolors. So I just finished reading Expressive Little Animals, and I also received some feedback that I am going to try out. So somebody pointed out that instead of trying to show you guys the pages, I just take a photo and bring them up on the screen. I'm going to try that out and see how much extra work that is. Hopefully it's not too bad. With this book, there's not actually all that many pages that I want to show you guys. So this is our second Amaryllis Henderson book. The first was Expressive Little Faces, which I liked. And now we're talking about learning how to draw animals. And I selected this book for a couple of reasons. I also enjoy drawing animals, and I teach students who are always interested in learning how to draw animals. Learning how to draw kawaii animals is like one of the most requested classes that I get. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to figure out if this book is a good fit and what age group this book might be a good fit for. It is a full color book. I believe it is put out by Ochre under their Quarry imprint. The MSRP on this book is $22.99, but I believe it is cheaper on Amazon, which is where I bought it. I'll have links down in the description below. And it promises 66 step-by-step tutorials. I am also going to have a full flip through at the end of this review if you guys want to see if this book is a good fit for you. All opinions are, of course, my own. I purchased this book out of pocket. I am not only an artist, but I am also an art teacher. So not only am I interested in this book as being something that I could use to educate myself, but also as a resource that I could recommend to students young and old. I have my notes written here. I will do my best. Perhaps eventually we'll work towards a teleprompter. Who knows? I have the notes though, because I also have ADHD, and I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about and not just going off the cuff. So the animal illustrations on the cover at the front and on the table of contents are well done and charming, particularly the table of contents. Flipping through this book, it looks very draw heavy, and step 1, step 2, step 3, not necessarily teaching you how to think about drawing animals. Now, at that point, I had just started with the book, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Usually when I am buying art books for myself, I like to get into the head of the artist, kind of see how they think. That is the most beneficial for me in learning how to draw and learning how to take on new techniques, is to learn how they think. Step 1, step 2, step 3 tutorials have never been that helpful for me, and it's not my preference when I'm teaching. That said, having taught, I know of a lot of people who actually prefer that. They're not necessarily interested in learning how to draw a wide variety of things. Like if they wanted to learn how to draw a cat, they're not really interested in learning how to draw cats as a whole and draw them walking and grooming and any of that. They're interested in learning how to draw a cat one time for this specific thing. So I do realize that how I like to learn and how I best learn does not work for everyone, and it's not what everyone is looking for. Unlike the last book, this one is going to focus on the sketch and then watercolor. There's no other medium. And that proved to be true for most of the book, but on page 4, she contradicts herself, or rather, she said that on page 4, and then she kind of contradicts herself on page 8, but realistically, this book is pretty much just graphite and then watercolor. There are some additional materials for additional projects, but the main focus is watercolor. And the main watercolors that she uses in this book are Dr. P.H. Martin's Radiant watercolors with some Magello colors. Now, she does mention the paints specifically by name. So if you wanted to color match with her, that would be pretty easy to do. But you can, I kind of wish in this one she did those little swatch things on the side, because if you're not a fan of the dye-based watercolors, then you could mix and match your colors yourself, and that would make it a little bit easier. So it doesn't really cover multimedia. She didn't outright mention brands when she was talking about like watercolor and art supplies that she likes. So I'm gonna pull some of that up here on the side so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna list the brands for you guys in case you wanna use what she's using and you're curious. So she shows Magello paints, she shows Radiant watercolors, which are the dye-based watercolors. She shows Copic opaque white, and it might be Hydrus, and she also shows a Signo white gel pen. She has Hydrus watercolor or maybe Amsterdam acrylic or calligraphic ink shown as well. On page 9, she mentions that hot press has a tooth, cold press does not. It's actually the reverse. It's cold press that has a tooth because it's run through cold rollers. Hot press is run through hot rollers and like an iron, it irons it out. it kind of made me wonder if this book was perhaps less edited, because that's kind of a, I wouldn't say it's a huge deal mistake, but that's like an easy one to catch. The brushes that she shows look like they might be cheaper synthetics, more affordable synthetics. She also shows Biscuit and Holbein masking fluid, Arteza gouache and acrylic, Posca markers, and she also shows an iPad that is probably using Procreate. In the back of the book, she does mention some of these materials specifically, but it's not like a shopping list. So if you guys like her art and you want to use what she's using, that is what she's showing in this book. On page 14, she demonstrates breaking animals into basic, easier to draw shapes. I find that very helpful. That's the approach that I use. When I teach it with volumetric drawing, where we're drawing volumetric shapes, but with her, it's basic shapes. Either approach, if that's what works for you, fantastic, phenomenal, go for it. On page 16 and 17, I like that she breaks animal features down and encourages readers to analyze and think critically. And she spends a lot of time talking about eye shapes, nose shapes, teeth shapes, scales, fur, feathers, that kind of thing. I really like that she's trying to encourage the reader, trying to encourage the artist to think about what they're drawing rather than just copying her. She spends a lot of pages doing this, and she also includes some close-ups like on page 21. So far in the book, I appreciate her encouraging readers to think about details like fur texture and scales. There are lots of stop and draw exercises to kind of get you practicing. I think that is great. You could almost treat that like a how to draw animal class. I really love when art books could be very easily transformed into a do at your own pace class. This would be a good book for libraries to carry. It's approachable with both kid and adult appeal. It is never so complicated that I think a 9-year-old couldn't do it, but there's a lot in there that would be appealing for an adult artist as well. So really good job on making such an approachable and appealing book. On page 28 and 29, after introducing a mode of thinking and analyzing, we go right into the step-by-step tutorials. And that part is more step 1, step 2, step 3. Copy what I do and it'll turn out okay. This would have been a great book to talk about using and analyzing reference, like photo reference, how to break it down, how to take what you're seeing in the reference and understand it and internalize it, how to utilize multiple reference sources in order to create an original gestalt. This would have been a really good opportunity to do that, but I can also understand why she chose not to. So it made me ask myself, do I want to do another tutorial on using reference to draw animals like with my sea turtle video? Because this book isn't really going to do that, so there's still niche for me to be able to offer that and maybe fill in some of those gaps. Because if you're watching this video, I know one of two things about you. You either like what I do and you watch all of my videos, which thank you guys so much, or you're curious about Watercolor Devo, Amaryllis Henderson, you're interested in either of the books, or you're interested in her collaboration with Peerless. So I figured that if there are some gaps in some of these books and I am already filling them, maybe you guys will check them out and find them helpful. The setup for this book, once we get past kind of the introductory section, is a few drawing tutorials on a theme and then watercolor tutorials, and it's kind of broken up by animal type, kinda. So like we have small animals, we have charismatic megafauna, we have like a really small amount of reptiles and amphibians. I mean, really, really small amount. And as somebody who loves herps, that's kind of disappointing because reptiles and amphibians are really cool. Then it's kind of broken down by like area of the planet. So like we have like Asian species, so like panda, red panda, and I've heard like golden monkey, I think was one of them, Australian animals. So it's not necessarily broken down in like specific categories. It's not like lagomorphs, which would be rabbits and hares, and rodentia, and felines and canines. It's not broken up by animal kingdom, and it's not really broken up by like planet region either. It's kind of a mishmash of both. She is using liquid concentrated watercolor, not the Peerless watercolor that she's got a collaboration with, and I wonder why. I bought those Peerless hoping that these two books would show me how to use them. No, not at all. On page 40, she mentions using reference, but never actually shows us how and never has any reference photos in here. And I do understand that unless she was taking the reference photos herself, which I take most of my own reference photos, so I know that is in the realm of possibility. Unless she's taking the reference photos herself, you need to obtain licensing rights, but a few would have been really helpful. And even if it was just like a frog on her window, her pet dog or her pet cat, that would still be really helpful in showing us how to utilize reference and how to draw from that reference. And those of you who watch my Easily Influenced series, y'all know that is like a big deal to me. I really want more artists to talk about using reference and not just mention it in passing. Her painting style is very cute. I wish she had more hero images, like big full page images, so we could see the details. Her photos demonstrating the techniques, there needs to be more of them and they need to be larger. And honestly, this is a pretty common problem with quarry books. So I know that Quattro runs on really tight timelines. I'm gonna kind of just chalk it up to not enough time was really given to make sure that she can take all the photos that she needs and that everything is really large, etc., etc. On page 46 and 47, her chipmunk is very cute, but we really need more steps to see how she's doing it because she kind of chunks everything down into like big steps. I really wish the book showed how she handles the liquid watercolor because I really struggle with using these liquid dye watercolors. I'd also like to see her palette and her workspace so I can kind of understand how she's setting herself up for success. On page 48, the hedgehog needs more painting steps. It's very similar to the chipmunk where we're just kind of skipping steps. I do get why she's teaching us this way. It's more immediately satisfying and it builds on success. And what I mean by that is why she's doing the copy me step 1, copy me step 2, copy me step 3, rather than teaching us to think critically about these animals. And as an art teacher, it's really kind of a toss-up. If I'm teaching a one-off class, it's often going to be like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. But if I get a longer class, or if we're teaching a broader subject like how to draw kawaii art or how to draw cute art, then I'll try to get them to think critically. Otherwise, it's going to be step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's not because it's my preference for teaching, but rather it is the limitation of teaching a large number of people in a short period of time how to do a concrete thing. So I do understand why she's going this route. And that's actually one of the reasons I think this book might be a really good fit for like the teen section of a library. You're building on success. That said, for me as an artist, it isn't helpful. I'm not going to just copy her art. On page 84 and 85, she has this really beautiful chameleon project. It's interesting to me that she paints the accent colors first and then works around it with the blue, and she doesn't even use masking fluid for it. That is a challenge. Big ups to her. I would be making such a mess of that. I think it turned out really cool. On page 86 and 87, the layering on the rainbow python is really pretty. Like, her art is really cute. I really like her art. I also like that for every section, she includes alternative activities that you can use to make these animals more your own, or to fit a slightly different theme, or to just kind of fit a different vibe. I really like that she's like encouraging you with some alternatives or some slightly different projects. On page 114 through 115, she has this really pretty rooster. I end up appreciating how she draws animals more than I end up, and I did flag a good number of flags in this book of things I wanted to revisit, but she didn't really talk about techniques or things that I could learn and I could try nearly as much as I would have liked. So I ended up commenting more on how pretty her art is than really learning as much as I would have liked, which is a shame because I really like her art and there's some really cool ideas that I would like to try. On page 122, it's clear that she's using reference. It's for this sea turtle. I wish she'd included the photo, and I feel the same about the images on 126 and 127. She has animal drawing classes on her Skillshare. She mentions that at the back of the book. And she also has a Watercolor Devo app that I may have to check out. She says she goes into deep dives there. I don't know if it's kind of like an Amino where like they provide the base platform and you can kind of turn it into what you want it to be, and that's offered as an app, or if somebody programmed an entire app for her. Either way, it's cool. Like, I just haven't checked it out yet. Also, she's kind of like the first art influencer I've encountered so far that has like pushing an app. So that's kind of interesting. So my final thoughts on Expressive Little Animals. It's both good and just okay. It really needs reference photos. We would benefit from seeing her studio, her workspace, her palette, how she handles her paints, because it's like half the book is about painting with these specific paints. And if you don't know how to use these watercolors, or if you don't know how to use watercolor at all, or if you struggle with dye-based watercolors, you might just never give it a shot, right? Because she doesn't really explain it in this book. And she does have other books, but I think it's drawing and painting expressive little faces, drawing cute animals in color pencil, drawing cute birds in color pencils. Those are her other books through Quattro. She also has Color Birds with a Z, and then some books that she's illustrated. So I can't really say that she has any books that are just about her painting process. And considering she works with a similar but very different type of watercolor from what I like to use, I would really like to learn more about her process. And yeah, I know she's got the Skillshare. We may take a look at that. I really wanted to avoid purchasing classes in the Easily Influenced because, one, I think I talked about this before, how am I supposed to show you guys that, right? Like, I don't want to spoil the class. I don't want to ruin the class. With a book, this is a physical object. I can show you bits without showing you all of it. But with an online class, that I feel starts to go into the territory of I might be ruining her class for people who want to take her class, you know? I'll keep digging. I'm sure she's got some free tutorials somewhere. And I'll certainly think about maybe checking out her classes, but that was an area I kind of wanted to avoid just, you know, for legal reasons and for not stepping on people's toes reasons. I get why she handles the book this way, where we're having the drawing tutorials and then we're having the painting tutorials and then we're having drawing tutorials and then we're having painting tutorials. It chunks it into a very approachable method. And it also makes it easier to find the animals that you might want to draw, but it's not my preference for art educational books. I like to learn how other artists think. I like to learn how they handle their materials. I like to learn how they set up their studio. I like looking at their sketchbook. I like getting in their heads, and this book is not that at all. I like learning who their inspirations are and who taught them how to do these things and who their artist friends are that they admire. This book is not that. Now, that said, even though this book is not, there's some things I could learn from this. For me, this would be a check this book out of the library, learn the things I want to learn, and then return it. But for some of my teen students, I think they would love this book. I think they would have a lot of fun with this book. I think some of them would do every single animal project in it. So I can definitely see the audience for this book. So I have read 2 of Amaryllis Henderson's books. We have read Drawing and Painting Expressive Little Faces. Check out all those tags. There's lots to revisit there. And I have read Drawing and Painting Expressive Little Animals. Not as many tags, but I think her art is really charming. It's super cute. It is approachable. I would say though, like, given how many steps she is skipping, at least with this book, there's a lot of room for like trying to do it like her and getting really frustrated and kind of just giving up on it. But I think with some persistence and embracing the fact that you're going to fail sometimes, and that is just part of making art, I think this book could be really great for a teen or young adult artist or anybody who wants to draw an animal and paint an animal, and then they can put it up on their wall rather than learning all the ins and outs and intricacies of drawing those animals. And there's some great how to draw animal books on the market that are going to cover that. And if you guys are curious, we can talk about those in another video. I cannot wait. I say that I'm a little trepidatious to talk about her Peerless Collaboration, to try out those Peerless watercolors, and to scour her social media to see if I can find any information on how she uses those paints so I don't totally embarrass myself, because I am really not good with dye-based watercolors. Like, I really struggle with them. Now, if I remember correctly, the back of the book says that she is using her Radiant watercolors on... Aha, I found it! On Canson XL watercolor pads, which, hey y'all, I like those too. So those are fairly inexpensive, and my problem might have been that I was trying to do them on cotton rag paper, and some materials just don't get along with other materials, and that's okay. So I can't wait for us to deep dive into Watercolor Devo / Amaryllis Henderson, kind of hopefully learn how she paints, take a look at how she handles herself online, what she's got going on, how is she sharing her art, to see if there's anything we can take from that, and then take a look at her Peerless collab. Time to talk about Amaryllis Henderson / Watercolor Devo's web presence. So we're going to start with her website. It is bright, it is colorful, it is the moment, and she promises to help us build a cohesive body of work and grow your work and brand with Amaryllis Henderson. Something we have noticed is that a lot of these influential artists offer classes, and not just classes on how to nick the knack of what they're doing, how to paint or draw or what have you the way they do, but how to sell your art. She is a SCAD grad, so she does actually have experience with portfolio building and working with companies and knowing what they're looking for, because that is something that the SCAD education in general gives. It might become outdated over time, it might change drastically as the internet changes, but there is that background of building a portfolio. So the cohesive body of work, I could kind of see her doing classes on, how to do that in very broad strokes. That might be beneficial to someone who's never built a portfolio before, but I'd be curious how much that costs. She also promises bold watercolor fun, and then there's a little about section. And I really love how a lot of this is just on her front page. Personally, I would rather, since I'm here to look at her art, I'd rather see about her and about her art rather than being sold a class like immediately. But I'm also assuming that a lot of people who are coming here came here from like Instagram or YouTube or Facebook. They like her art already and they want to see more. So she is a licensed artist, published author, and popular instructor. Amaryllis' themes of truth, life, and beauty often find their way through her watercolor brushes. I guess that means it is reflected in her art. Amaryllis' lush florals, bold lettering, and festive Christmas designs has spread their way across a variety of product markets since attaining her BFA in illustration from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Her personal work, coined Watercolor Devos, stems from her Christian faith, which found its rebirth with newfound motherhood, and she's living in Rochester, Minnesota. watercolor freely and on the regular. We can start now. Grow your work and brand. There's a collaboration inquiry. I kind of wonder what that has to do. Recommended art supplies, instructional art books, online learning, collaboration inquiry, licensed products, and shop art prints. So I am particularly curious in this moment about, she has a free workshop for artists, how to paint freely without doubting yourself or copying others. The sketchbook I barely touched for 3 years is suddenly almost full. Thank you, Amaryllis, says Jennifer Lawrence. By the end of this training, you will stop waiting for elusive inspiration, break free from comparison, and start your art practice right away. So I am very tempted about this, but I actually cannot commit to a time period today. So I'm going to have to come back to this. I'm really genuinely curious if there is any, part of the easily influenced series. Oh, she will not let me right click it. I cannot open to another tab for another time. Part of the easily influenced series is, you know, genuinely learning from other artists and seeing what they have to offer that I'm not aware of, because like, just because I have a formal art education, it doesn't mean I know anything. I don't even barely begin to know everything. And learning from other artists is, you know, it has been my biggest source of education over the years, whether it's artist blogs, artist social media, or my artist friends. Learning from other artists has been the biggest source of my growth. Let's check out this collaboration inquiry. Oh, we can email her. That's like a random cold email with like no suggestions on like how we're going to collaborate. I have a feeling though it's classes, because it's always classes, Pinky. So we'll just scroll up, because this seems to be like the books and stuff category of her shop. We read Drawing and Painting Expressive Little Animals. We read Drawing and Painting Expressive Little Faces. She has a YouTube channel that we're going to be taking a look at in a moment. She does talk about the paints that she uses. Remember, we're taking a look at her collaboration with Peerless Watercolors today. She recommends Dr. P.H. Martin's Fluid Art Supplies. We saw that used in her books. Peerless Watercolor paints. And then the Expressive Face Tone paints. Her hand-picked paint pack. Boy, say that 3 times fast. And this is actually what I ordered. So I guess we are like... she does have this very cute little paint set here with like a little binder pouch and a pen. Let's check out her products. Hey, look, Ma, I made it. Click to follow to the, wow, can I read today? Somebody pointed out in one of my videos, one of my easily influenced, that they found that the funny voices that I do, they felt like I was being disrespectful to the artists. I just want to point out that that is not my intention. I do the silly voices because it actually helps me read a little bit better. It helps me focus. It like pings that part of the brain and I stutter less, but also because I thought it would be just more amusing for me and for you guys. It isn't meant as any disrespect to any of these artists. It's just me trying to like, you know, maintain your attention in an attention economy, in this attention economy on YouTube. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to be fun and playful. And I realize, like, to people who don't know me and don't watch what I do and don't read my books, y'all don't know that. So just thought I would explain. Hey, look, Ma, I made it. Click to follow links to the places and sites where you and Mom can find my art on products. She's got several very cute licensing deals going on. I'm not really sure how this is her. Maybe she did the design lettering for that. We saw Color Birds with a Z. It really reminds me of like cats and dogs and pets from the 2000s. That was my jam. She is on some fabric. She's got, wait, okay. This is just repeating itself. I think it might be to make it look more full. Maybe they're slightly different. Yeah, I guess so. This is the new version and this is the old version. And a lot of devotional stuff. She is a top teacher awarded since 2015. Not sure like who. Hosts the sold out workshops, Passion.io, App Leader channels, App Leader. Like I'm not sure who gave out that award. And also something I've noticed with these is when they talk about how many unique students they have in their classes, often they're also talking about like their YouTube subscribers. And then she's got Tip Tuesdays. I believe I am subscribed to her, but I will sign up. So we have a free workshop, Explore Creativity. Help inspire me. Take out your sketchbook and get ready to jot notes. Let's face what's keeping you from painting freely and how to start. Unleash the artist, show me how to grow, and design collections. Empower me to go. I'm just kind of curious how much these cost. We have seen a variety of price points in this series. Oh, is she not? Is she just, okay, she's going to talk to us about it. Not going to watch that, sorry. Okay, actually, I don't know about this. So it is a subscription fee it's $25 a month with painting lessons, audio chats, monthly live painting session, and a private community. Is this actually on? No, it's not on Patreon. Interesting. Some of these have been like, so I'm going to have to go back to find it. Got the art in you. Let's get that art out of you. Break the block between you and your best work. Go bold. Join now. Free for a week. I can't help it. Man, there is a lot here. Okay, 7 days free, $25 a month after. So it is a monthly subscription fee. So basically you're getting lessons. I don't know how many lessons. Maybe you're getting one a week. Maybe you're getting one a month. You are getting a pre-existing community of other artists. So while that is something she's grown and curated, a lot of that value is coming from the other artists. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. There are existing art communities that are very helpful, passionate, and driven that you could join possibly for free. There is also the live chat, which I'm not sure if that is like a live stream or if that's a one-on-one chat. And here we go. This makes it all materials shared within its exclusive content. Video segments ranging from 10 to 25 minutes will be shared at least twice a month. Okay, so you're at least getting 2 videos. A live painting session will be held monthly over Zoom, and private access to the community. So it's a walled garden community. Traditional classes are not included with this, and you have to buy that through Skillshare. So if you're looking for more like class structure, this ain't it, y'all. You'll see me in the community, but you may see a delay. I found my prompt responses keep others from speaking up. I see absolutely every comment and offer my insight as needed. So there's, and you can also reserve your questions for the live call. So there is no, if you're paying your $25 a month for this, there is no guarantee that she herself will answer your questions. So on that thought process, if other artists are answering your questions in her walled garden and they're paying to be in the walled garden, they are paying to answer your questions, and you are paying her for another artist to answer your questions. And that, you might like that. Like, you might like that community aspect. It might be worth it to you to have it curated. And honestly, I do find that when people have to pay to be part of something, they tend to take it more seriously and you get less trolls. It's kind of like the Something Awful forums effect from a few years ago. So I'm not actually dismissing that. I just want to be really crystal about who is probably answering your questions and what that looks like, because in a lot of the sales pitch, that wasn't really made clear, I feel like. So with the watercolor build, this is about $50 a month, a little shy of 50, but like, honestly, if you're paying with credit card, it's 50, right? Watercolor Bold membership, access to the Artist Pro method course, not sure what that is, Photoshop tutorials, you guys see why I do the silly voices now, right? Photoshop tutorials using bold artwork, collection briefs with prompts and guidance, and direct feedback and help to questions. So if you actually want to make sure you get tutorials, you get some prompts, like, I'm not really sure if this is like meant to emulate what companies are looking for, or if it is literally just a prompt list every month, but this is the tier. And then to actually hear back from her, you have to pay about double what you would pay. Do I have to paint exactly what? Okay, so it's suggestions, 2 to 3 painting lessons a month, used to showcase design tutorials, encouraged to create your own works. Do I have to purchase the Artist Pro? It's included Photoshop lessons. Okay, so if you're interested in learning Photoshop specifically, like she does Photoshop, this could be really helpful. Voice questions throughout the collection building process, from selecting works to color palettes, from layouts to Photoshop hang-ups. The community is a great asset for feedback, and Amaryllis will respond personally to specialized questions weekly. Loom is used to share technical questions and responses through its easy screen sharing. So basically, if you want that like curated, guided response, you need to pay about double for that. And like, let's be fair, right? Like, artists' time has value. Somebody who has experience, that time has value. So here is her shop, prints, canvas, and framed. And I do really like her art. I think her animal art is super cute and charming. Oh, I really like a lot of this. She's got some beautiful prints. I'm kind of curious to see how much they go for. Okay, an art poster is $20, a canvas wrap is $43, and then a framed print is $96. And this is all on her personal site. It didn't funnel us over to Etsy. And then you can get gift cards as well if you so desire. So that is her website. Let's take a look at some of her social media. Back to the good old DuckDuckGo. So we have a YouTube channel. We have her guide, 80 pages of watercolor techniques organized from beginner to advanced. That is interesting to me as we're taking a look at some of her products today. We have her Facebook group. And then, yeah, she's got like an app, and I never took a look at her app. So let us go over to the YouTube page. I'm kind of surprised Instagram didn't pop up in there. I'll double check. I am sure she has an Instagram. Okay, so on her channel, she's got what looks like a podcast. Honestly, like looking at her channel, I'm not really sure if this is meant to be like to entice you to buy her classes or just because she enjoys sharing to YouTube. So I would say A to Z style artist spotlights. That could be kind of cool, talking to different artists and like what kind of style they have and what they bring to the table. And then she has some shorts and then some face tutorials. And it looks like maybe it's to promote the book. There's nothing wrong with that at all. She had a Let's Watercolor mini series. She has a Photoshop series, sample a class, so you can kind of get like a feel for what she's bringing to the table. Chasing Mary Blair. Oh, at least she's honest about it. Although to be fair, when I was reading her books, I pointed out to you guys, like, she listed a lot of male inspiration, but I was really getting like Mary Blair vibes from her. I wanted to see more inspirations, more cartoonists, more comic artists, more animators listed. So like it makes sense that like Mary Blair is a huge inspiration on her work. And here is her Facebook. You know, I remind you guys all the time to like follow me on socials, to follow me on YouTube, and I am a fine one to talk because like her stuff will get recommended to me pretty regularly. Like I see her stuff a lot, but I'm apparently not following her. It's just being served to me. So like that's like just a reminder that if you like somebody's art legitimately, hit that follow button because maybe you're not following them and they are not going to be served to you. Like you're not going to see their art. You're not going to see their posts if you don't interact with them in some way. And that sounds like real content creatory. And I hate that, but it is the truth. Very charming. A lot of illustrations. Wait, she has really, really charming art. I really like it. There's a lot of edagame influence to it. It's so pretty. It's so charming. I love her use of color and unexpected flashes of color. It's very fun, very playful, very inviting, very just very nice. Like I love her illustrative picture book art. So good. And look how bright, fun, colorful, super saturated colors. Oh, okay. We're going to do the Instagram sleuthing thing, right? Like, you know, why is Instagram... Actually, I'm that nosy person. My Instagram is doing terribly. I'm kind of curious how many... She gets a lot of comments. But it does not seem to say how many likes she gets. So we have reel, carousel, reel, the real. A lot of reels. Wow. Okay, but okay, I see what she's doing. All right, that's pretty accessible. It's not necessarily like there is some of her process, but it's not like necessarily a lot of her process. Oh, that one's gorgeous. Oh, is it a little paper cutout? I love that. And that is also her process. And we see her using the synthetic brushes. So you got those of you who like the synthetic brushes, see? Just because I don't like them doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. I just don't like them. Her face painting stuff is so cute. And it looks like she's starting by blocking in the basic shape and then kind of painting the colors on top of that. We're gonna watch me fail at that today, because that is not at all my process. And there's nothing wrong with that process, by the way. It's just that when you're trying out somebody else's process, when you're trying out somebody else's thing, like, there is a high risk of failure. So the Easily Influenced series has a lot of humbling for me, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with, you know, being reminded that you have room to grow and room to improve. So her social media, her Instagram is definitely the most appealing, the most charming. It's got these really beautiful colors. I sincerely do not understand why she doesn't have like way more followers than she has, because her art is so gorgeous. Her Facebook, similar, not exactly the same, seems to be a little bit more personal. Her YouTube has some stuff on it. I was surprised at how scant her YouTube channel is. I just really thought there'd be more. And it seems like the main site is her website, which we all are told, you know, that should be our focus. What with social media being a dumpster fire and like limiting who sees our stuff, you know, pushing people to your website and pushing people to your mailing list is like the recommended de rigueur of like how to be an artist on the internet in this year of 2024. But she has she's doing her fabric through Spoonflower. That's cool. Okay, so Spoonflower is you submit your work to them, but that way you can have some of her beautiful art on fabric. She also seems to have like a partnership with Moda. So that's very cool. One of the things I really would have liked to have learned from the series, and this seems to be behind paywalls, and I 100% understand why it's behind paywalls, is for some of them to talk about how they transitioned from being like an internet popular artist to having like agents and licensing deals, like what that process looked like. So now that we've looked at her beautiful, beautiful art, we've looked at her website, her Facebook, her YouTube, her Instagram, let us take a look at her collaboration with Peerless. Amaryllis's collaboration is with Peerless Watercolors, and we haven't talked about Peerless Watercolors for a while. I thought we would just do a quick look at their website and kind of what they have to offer. So Peerless are a paper-based, dye-based watercolor. So basically the dye is affixed to a paper substrate. You are probably most used to seeing Peerless in this form. Maybe you've seen it in this form, or you may have seen it as the individual sheets. They also offer these kind of additional packs with more colors, or like select colors like the Autumn Chewy pack right there, or the Artist Palette pack here, or the Sidekick, which we're going to be taking a look at today, in addition to Amaryllis's Expressive Little Faces or Expressive Faces or Expressive Portrait pack. So they have some options. Basically, it kind of revolves around these sets. They also have a mystery grab bag. What is a dry spot kit? Oh, interesting. This is for black and white photos. That brings up a point. So Peerless was actually developed for tinting photographs, which sometimes I forget about that when we're talking about Peerless. So Peerless has been around for a really, really long time. And I believe they kind of found their resurgence when crafters kind of rediscovered how interesting these are. Now, I'm not actually seeing the little faces kit that we were talking about. So I don't know. I may find that later, I might not. We are also taking a look at the Sidekick today. And what's cool about the Sidekick is it's just kind of a more accessible format for these watercolors. It contains 9 sheets of 5 different paints per sheet for a total of 45 colors. And these are some of their most popular colors. It was chosen by looking at their best-selling and most popular colors from each shade. And I also want to point out, 45 colors for $30 is not a bad deal. Now, you know, with these kind of watercolors, you can run through them kind of quickly depending on what you're doing and how you use them. And they do sell refills for these. So these are also non-toxic. So if you are painting around kids and pets, these could be a good option compared to traditional watercolors. They are not talking about light fastness, so you know, I would assume that Peerless has very low light fastness for them. They also have a paint along palette. Let's take a look at this. Oh, it's cute. It's coloring sheets. That is adorable. So that's just a little quick look at Peerless watercolors. So I have my Canson XL. I have a cup of clean water. I have a soft silver black velvet flat. What I think I'm going to do for this is we've got a lot of swatching ahead of us, and I don't think I feel like talking through the whole thing, right? That's a lot of talking, and we've already sat through a lot of talking. So what I'm going to do, I think I may regret this, is I may tape this either directly to the desk, or ideally I may tape it to a piece of coroplast or chipboard. That way it'll hold it tight, it won't buckle all over the place, but I can move it aside to dry and just continue swatching. I think I am going to start by taking a look at Expressive face tones. So this has a very like hand packaged feel, which you love to see it. It does not come in a booklet form, and it is our Peerless watercolors with the color written on the back. So this is actually going to make things a little challenging. Look, let's just take a moment though and appreciate, like, y'all know I don't love dye-based watercolors, and these are a little challenging to handle, and you really should try to put them in a book form of some sort. But I'm going to try to keep them in order. We have Bismark Brown. We have Warm Sepia. We have Carnation Pink. We have, and all this speckling, that's the dry dye. Isn't that neat? Makeup. We have Yellow Ochre. We have Cadmium Yellow, and I'm trying to touch them as little as possible so I don't get dyes on my fingers, but handling them as little as I am still. Nectar. We have Blush Rose Pink, and we have Smackin Pink. What a collection of colors. And I'm a little curious about how Watercolor Devo handles these, how she sets them up. So what I think I'm going to do off camera is I'm just going to do a little digging. I'm going to see if maybe she's created a palette with these or what, and just try to get some tips from her. I'm not going to share that, but I will take notes to share with you guys. So one of the first things I think I want to do is I think I want to cut a stripe off of each of these and kind of create an insert page or two that I can just kind of slip in here. I mean, it's not going to be spiral bound, so it's not going to work the same way, but at least it'll kind of keep everything together, and it will mean I'm not ruining what I don't need, what doesn't need to be ruined. It's going to kind of hopefully just keep things a little bit neater and tidier. If I thought I could get all of them on this front page, I would, but I don't think I can. So Yupo would be like brilliant for this. Maybe I'll go see if I have some Yupo, but even just a sturdy cardstock and some double stick tape would work really well for this. Before I start to swatch these, I wanted to make a couple of inserts for my Sidekick. So I'm using some Montval watercolor paper, and I'm going to trim it down to a size that will fit in the Sidekick, and I'm going to use my paper cutter just to trim it up, makes it nice and easy. I have my Expressive Faces mini palette, and I'm trying to cut them down to the size of the paint that is in the Sidekick, and I'm going to use a tape roller just to apply some adhesive to the back. So I'm going to cut my paint first and put it in order, and then I'm just going to work through and add it into my fake Sidekick. So I have encountered a kind of annoying problem. I am actually short. I was supposed to get 10 colors. I'm short a color of the Expressive face tones, which means I need to reach out to Peerless and try to remedy this. Kind of ironically, for a face tone set, I am actually missing Flush Tint. I don't mean to vent, but sometimes I feel like this happens just a lot. And I don't think that Peerless is like a bad company. I literally just had to contact Blick about a similar kind of issue. I think what it is I don't let these companies know that I'm purchasing this to review. I just buy it so that I get the same thing anybody else would get, because I am not only a reviewer, I'm a consumer. I love art supplies. I like making art. And I feel like any package I get should be the same thing y'all would get, right? Like it shouldn't matter if there's a review or not. Care and quality control should go into every package. So I feel kind of bad because it looks bad for these companies when they forget things, when they don't let consumers know about shortages, when they don't communicate well, or when you're just missing something. I'm not trying to pick on Nicholson's Peerless. This has like the feel of a small family run operation from what I've seen. So like, I'm going to cut them some slack. I'm going to give them a chance to make it right. And for all I know, Flesh Tint is in here and we can still swatch it today. It's a 10 color set and we're missing one of the colors. Like, 10% of the set is missing. And these kind of watercolors are not cheap. So like, just for completionist's sake, this is what I'm writing to them. Hi Peerless, a while back I purchased a Sidekick and an Expressive face tones palette from you. I finally had a chance to open them and found that I'm missing Flesh Tint from my Expressive face tone set. This set was purchased in October and I realized it may be too late to do anything other than try to purchase just that color. It's not included in the Sidekick and I purchased these to review on my channel, so I'm hoping to be able to swatch all the colors in the set so people can see what it looks like. Is there any way you can send me a Flesh Tint or I can purchase one individually? Thanks, Becca Hilburn. And the only reason I mentioned that I am reviewing it is honestly because you guys are going to see the colors, right? And like, if there's any way doing a review might convince them to send me the color I purchased, I guess I'm going to try it. But generally, I really am not comfortable with the companies realizing that I'm buying it for review because like I mentioned, I want my experience to be the same as y'all's. So here's the annoying thing. This is going to mess up my momentum. I have ADHD, as I have mentioned, like every video. And I had a good groove going today. And being missing a color is kind of a hiccup, right? Like things aren't going to move so smoothly. So what I am going to do is I am going to progress as though nothing had happened. I'm just going to leave the space. I'm going to swatch it. And we're just going to have to come back to it when I hear from them. Years ago, I bought one of their like original books. And I even made like this neat little palette with the individual dye colors to make it a little easier to use. I have moved twice since then. I went to look for that palette. I cannot find it. I also have like a Viva set that I can't find that I'd like to find. So like theoretically, I have this color in that original set that I cannot find, but as I cannot find it and I am impulsive, we're just gonna progress with this and wait and see what Peerless has to say. Because in the end, realistically, I paid for a 10 color set. I should receive a 10 color set and they should have the opportunity to fix it, especially because they are a handmade watercolor company. This is a good opportunity for some good customer service, some good customer support, and for them to be able to stand out in a way that a lot of other art supply manufacturers, especially those available through Amazon and AliExpress, can't do. So Just to keep everything kind of organized, I'm going to go ahead and label all the spaces first before I start attaching my Peerless paint pucks. I don't really know what to call them. They're not swatches. They're just part of the Peerless watercolor. So I am trying to not get this all over my hand. I ended up using like an adhesive daughter because my tape runner had run out. And I'm placing them, and then I'm going to use a piece of plastic just to smush them down so that they don't go anywhere. It would have been really helpful if the Sidekick were arc spiral bound, because then I could just put this in there, but it's not. It's just regular spiral bound, so they're just going to have to stick in the front. Start by swatching Amaryllis's Collaboration. I am using a cup of clean filtered water, and I have a flat brush. They did recommend using a water brush with these, but I hate water brushes, so I didn't feel like that would be truly fair to the product itself. The colors are really immediate, bright and vibrant, maybe quicker and more immediate than traditional half pans. Due to the nature of dye-based watercolors, these will not have granulation, not have opacity, and not contain optical brighteners or PW6. Hence why some of the colors look a little bit strange. However, these will probably not be light fast at all. I wanted to hold off on judging Amaryllis's Collaboration until I got Flesh Tint, but it's been 2 weeks and I've poked Peerless a couple times and I still haven't heard from them. So we're moving on to swatching the Sidekick. Swatching is kind of held up every 5 swatches because that means a page turn, and my paint on the Sidekick is still wet and some colors dry slower than others. This slows me down quite a bit. It may not be an issue for other artists, but it does bother me. I also dislike that the paper on the Sidekick is like a coated cardstock. It's still susceptible to water, but I can't swatch on the paper to give an accurate reflection of the color. So if you need specific colors in the Sidekick and you like to dance around your palette, this may be a challenge. You can tear out individual colors, sure, but it's not like it's arc bound and can be mixed and matched, removed and replaced. So with this palette, you add water to your dye-based paints. The water is going to stay on the paper for a bit, and you can't just dance around the palette the way you could with an open palette. Some of these colors take forever to dry, enough for me to just turn the page. I've been picking at these swatches for a couple of hours, just waiting for them to be dry enough to flip. So during the student grade showdown, and with some of the paints claiming to be professional, I've complained that the paints in some of those palettes are all dye-based. My issue isn't with dye-based watercolor, although it's not my preference, but with paints pretending to be mineral pigment-based and charging prices that reflect that, while relying on dyes instead, which makes them cheaper to manufacture. So as long as a company is honest about what they're producing and selling, I can take that into consideration when reviewing the paints. I find that dye-based neutrals also always really feel kind of synthetic. It's just not my preference. The Sidekick has perforations, so I guess you could separate out the individual swatches and flip through the palettes to create a custom 5 palette grid of colors. So I'm still waiting on this to dry, and I'm still waiting on this to dry, but I can set them aside and I can start inking the Fieldtest. And I decided I wanted to paint some citrus because these really bright, vibrant, fun colors just seem like they would really lend themselves well to citrus. So on the last remaining piece of my Canson Montval little mini block, so it is a cellulose paper, I am going to paint some cute little citrus. I've mentioned a few times during this easel influence that I really struggle with dye-based watercolors. I think I found some methods that work okay for them, like using a flat ceramic palette for color mixing and dilution, adding in lots of wet into wet for visual interest, and try to build up depth and interest. I find dye-based watercolors feel flat, even when working wet into wet, because I love granulation for adding interest and depth. There's no color chromatography with these dyes. Color mixes stay mixed and don't split, and I find myself kind of wanting some color chromatography. Maybe Peerless could do a special splits palette. That might be really fun. I also find that once these paints dry, they've stained the paper, which isn't too surprising as finely ground pigment-based watercolors tend to be fairly staining due to the particle size, so it wouldn't surprise me if dye-based watercolors like this held true to that statement. I'm legit surprised there isn't a lime green in the Sidekicks palette. It sort of seems like it's designed for brush letterers and calligraphers, artists who typically love really bright, fun colors. I feel like dye-based watercolors are a perfect example of something just really not being for me while still being a quality product. Of the dye-based watercolors that I've used, I feel like Peerless is probably my favorite. I've always struggled with Radiant, and the Peerless Sidekick is, for the most part, in a format that is much easier for me to work with than liquid dyes. I can see why other artists might like it. The color is pure and vibrant, and you can do some nice wet and to wet with it. It layers well and can give you a really fun, crispy effect, but it's a little too clean for me, and not really what I'm going for when I paint. A lot of y'all ask me about watercolors for coloring books. Peerless might be a great option. It's fairly inexpensive, it's very portable, there's loads of colors so you don't necessarily have to do a lot of mixing. You can buy refills for the Sidekick, a little bit goes a long way. You can use a water brush with these. They're decent watercolors for someone who doesn't necessarily like watercolor. While I'd argue you don't need a lot of supplies for regular watercolor, you need even fewer to paint with Peerless. They muddy the water very slowly, so if you're bad about water changes, these might be a great fit. They deliver almost immediate color saturation unless you intentionally water them down, so if you're one of those who feel like watercolor is too pastel, these might be a good option. And Peerless doesn't junk up the paints the way many other dye-based half-pan watercolors do with needless binders, extenders, and optical brighteners that cause colors to not mix and paint to scale. I can see a lot of reasons to really like Peerless watercolors, and I can understand why other art for reproduction artists might find it an appealing option. And maybe the longer I play around with them, the more I'll grow to see all their virtues, and they may find a place in my studio sort of similar to how I use alcohol markers. Amaryllis uses dye-based watercolors alongside Magella watercolors, so if there are aspects of Peerless that you don't love, you can always sub in a few favorite colors, like an ultramarine blue that granulates, some better neutrals that feel more organic. And y'all may see me pull out these swatches to compare colors against half pans that are suspiciously dye-like, just to kind of prove a point in a later future video. Peerless is legitimately a small American company that manufactures these products by hand. While these watercolors aren't currently my favorite, I can see a lot of quality and care has gone into these. Naturally, you could allow these to dry on your ceramic palette or butcher's block and reactivate them. So long as dust and hair doesn't get into it, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, I'm going to kind of re-harp on this point. I'm still missing a color. Peerless still hasn't gotten back to me. I can't really 100% judge Amaryllis's color choices in her 10 color palette if I'm missing 1/10 of that palette, especially it's a color that might have the potential to kind of tie that palette together for me in a way that I don't feel like that palette is currently coming together. And it is actually one of the reasons why I opted to just do something that would use colors in the Sidekick rather than do something that actually uses the colors from Amaryllis's palette, because that kind of lighter flesh tint is just a color I use a lot, even when I'm building up darker skin tones. And to not have it really kind of leaves me stymied, but I still wanted to be able to make progress and to be able to talk about Peerless watercolors as a whole. It's kind of a shame that Peerless hasn't gotten back to me yet. I don't want to think that's indicative of their customer service in general, and I may have just had the misfortune of slipping through the cracks, but it does affect my ability to review these, and it does influence what I'm going to say during this review. So what are the pros and cons of Peerless Watercolors and Amaryllis's collaboration with Peerless Expressive Face Tones? Let's start on a positive note. Let's talk about the pros. These are very easy to use, possibly easier than regular watercolor if you're not someone who wants like 1,000 layers or 1,000 glazes. If you don't mind losing the opacity and you don't mind losing granulation and interesting granulation effects. These handle very nicely on cheaper papers like cellulose, so they're a good option for artists on a budget or artists possibly doing coloring pages. These also don't need as much as, say, like regular half pans do. Basically, if you have a couple of brushes, including water brushes, and like a couple ceramic plates from like Dollar Tree, you're pretty much ready to go with these. So these are a very minimal watercolor option that I think a lot of people who are newer to watercolor or thinking about being interested in water media might enjoy. Also, if you like kind of the colors available in alcohol markers, but you want that with watercolor, these are going to be a little bit easier than a lot of the dye-based watercolors are in the market. That said, there are also a lot of watercolor markers that are dye-based, like Ecoline, and I think Ecoline has empties too. So if you like a Peerless color, you could get the Peerless liquid and then put it in an Ecoline empty. But anyway, there are also dye-based watercolor markers that'll give you a similar effect. Wet into wet diffuses a lot, but you can build up some interesting effects by doing that. And you guys can see I kind of introduced a lot of wet into wet into the Fieldtest. These are a bit cheaper than regular half pan watercolors, and you get a lot of different colors for your money. So if you don't like doing a lot of color mixing, if you want the whole rainbow at your fingertips, these could be a very good alternative than those cheap Amazon and AliExpress sets that I've reviewed that are going to be dye-based anyway. This is just more honest, more to the point, without the optical brighteners, without the extenders, without pretending to be something it's not. So what about the cons? For Amaryllis's colors, I had to make my own Sidekick insert. I wish they offered blanks or used an arc ring system for easy in and out. I don't mind making my own, I just wish they could rest securely in the Sidekick, particularly because they do these like little bonus add-on sets. I'm also missing Flesh Tint, which I feel like would probably help tie her palette together. Let me move this so you guys can see. This row here is her palette. So I feel like right now there's some decent darker skin tones and blushes, but little that really works well for lighter skin tones. Like you could water this one down and get kind of a really blushy sort of skin tone, but I really want to see what Flesh Tint brings to the table here. And this is quite the reverse of like what I have seen with watercolors. Usually the colors for darker skin tones are terrible, and then they have like a Jaune Brilliant for the lighter skin tones. At least we're getting a little bit of representation here. I also miss granulation and interesting optical effects. So I'm going to check in with you guys and talk about these and her books more face to face. But in general, my verdict for Peerless is I can see why other artists like them. I'm still not feeling like they're the best fit for me right now, but if I played around with them some more, I think I could definitely find ways to use them and find ways to enjoy them. I think they're a quality product and they're made by a small American business, so of course I want to support that. I love when small businesses are doing good work and deserve to have their praises shouted. It seems to be the more sussy businesses get all the praise and recognition, and the legit businesses tend to not get the recognition that they deserve. So here I am to shout out to Peerless. Now, it's not for me right now, but that doesn't mean it's not for you. If you are a floral artist, you'll probably love the rich, immediate, bright, vibrant color, the diffused wet into wet. You may not miss the granulation. If you're a brush letterer, I really feel like these were formulated for you. This is your watercolor. If you like really bright, poppy picture book colors, these are also a really good fit. If you do surface design and you need a bold punch of colors, these are great. I can definitely see the appeal, and I can definitely see a lot of you guys who are watching this really enjoying these watercolors, these being what you're looking for. So that was quite a review today. We talked about 2 books and 2 watercolor palettes, and kind of the exciting thing is this kind of forced me to rethink how I feel about Peerless watercolors, and I actually revised my opinion on them. So here is our swatch sheet. As of the time I am recording this, I am still missing flesh tint, and I still haven't heard back from Peerless, but it's only been 2 days, so I'm just trying to get some things wrapped up. I will add it to my swatch sheet, and if it arrives in time, add that to this video as well so you guys can get an idea of what that color looks like. If I ran out of time, I will find an example of it on the internet and put it right here. So editing Becca and future me will know. But I found that once you kind of hit a stride with how to use these, if you use a ceramic mixing palette to mix your colors, if you take your time, and if you work kind of strategically, you can kind of hit a rhythm. And the Sidekick and the way they are presented in the Sidekick was actually quite helpful for that. I would love to see Peerless come up with even more kind of accoutrements for their Peerless watercolors to make them more accessible for artists. I would love to see them come up with some interesting palette ideas or some ways of organizing the colors, maybe kind of like a color chart, and you can just pick little bits of the color that you need and then just snip off and refill. That could be an idea. I'll kind of include an image of kind of sort of what I'm talking about so you guys get an idea. I found Expressive Little Faces to be a good book if you are interested in drawing faces, if you're interested in drawing portraits. This is something that I would probably recommend to libraries, and I would recommend it to my students as well. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. Even for somebody whose bread and butter is drawing expressive little faces, there's still a lot of material that I can revisit and relearn from, and you love to see it. We are here to learn every day. We are never finished with our artistic journeys. There's always more room to learn and more room to grow. I didn't resonate with expressive little animals on a personal level as much. It wasn't as helpful to me as Expressive Little Faces, but this is another one that I think would be a great fit for libraries, would be a great fit for artists who want to follow step 1, step 2, step 3, and be able to recreate the exact animals that she's demonstrating in this book. But it's less about her thought process and how she sees the world and how she sees these animals, and more like copy what I do. It does skip a lot of steps. It would actually benefit from having printable templates in the back because she skips so many steps, and she really could and should walk you through her watercolor process more, and should probably show you how she sets up her paints and her palette, because if you are newer to watercolor, it's going to be more of a challenge. I was missing one of the colors from my 10 color set, and I contacted Peerless about it, and like I said, I haven't heard back yet, but it also hasn't been that long. And it's kind of a really important color for painting expressive little faces, in my opinion. So I can't really comment on this in particular, but I did do an expressive and colorful little field test of some fun citrus fruits using a variety of colors from the Sidekick. I also went ahead and inserted my Expressive Little Faces palettes into the Sidekick, and finding a way to make this more expandable and more customizable would be really cool. Peerless, that might be an area to explore. But all in all, it caused me to kind of revisit my preconceived notions and my other experiences with, like 5 extra years of watercolor experience under my belt. And I have a very different opinion of Peerless watercolors than I did previously. I can definitely see why people like these. I can see why people pick these, especially reproduction artists, artists who are painting to scan it and then put that on plates or napkins or comic pages. I would not recommend this if you sell the originals, unless you are very clear with your audience that these are not going to be light fast. They need to be behind UV glass and never displayed in full sunlight. Those kind of precautions are really pretty important, and you really should let your audience know those sort of things, because since they are dye-based, they're going to be pretty fugitive, and it is probably going to fade. I love that Peerless watercolors are not toxic, because a lot of you guys come to me and you're like, I want to watercolor with my kids. Can you recommend good, fun, bright, affordable watercolors that'll last a while, that are not toxic, that my kid can actually play around with? I think Peerless might be what you're looking for, but do keep in mind that a lot of dye-based watercolors are intensely staining. So if you have a kiddo who gets it on their hands and then wipes it on themselves and like let's be real. That was me all through undergrad, right? No judgment here. These might need some adult supervision, but all in all, I think they're really fun. I can see brush letterers using them. I can see illustrators loving them. If you don't mind the lack of granulation and just some differences between how these handle and how traditional watercolors handle, I think you'll really like Peerless Watercolors. And these were purchased out of pocket. They don't know I'm doing a review. At least I don't think they know I'm doing a review. So this is just my own opinion. If you're looking for something a little bit different with watercolor, if you've struggled with watercolor in the past for various reasons, these might be worth a shot. And I don't know if Peerless does a sampler, but like a $10 mini swatch sampler might get you guys so many more customers, because I think this is really a product that you need to try it out, and then you can kind of see where it would fall in place for you and whether or not it would be useful for you. But they are not that expensive. You can also buy the smaller packs. So it's a really flexible watercolor product for people who are just kind of watercolor curious. So I hope today's Easily Influenced was helpful, useful, and informational for you guys. I hope it inspired you in some way, shape, or form. Hopefully it empowered you, because that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with this series, is empower you, fellow art supply consumer, fellow artists, to find resources and art supplies that you love without all the hype. So let me know if this was helpful for you guys down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for this premiere. I had a lot of fun hanging out with you guys. These premieres are always so much fun. And I hope I will see you guys again soon with another art supply review, tutorial, or Easily Influenced. Now, before you go, if you're looking for more Becca Hilburn goodness, if you like what I had to say today, it would really mean a lot to me if you checked out my comic, 7-Inch Kara. It is a charming watercolor webcomic about an ADHD coded little girl named Kara, who happens to be a Lilliputian living in a dollhouse in a forgotten shed. A new human family moves into the larger house, and Kara's father wants to pack up and go immediately. And Kara decides to find out for herself if the myths about humans are true. You guys can find Volume 1 and Volume 2 at the Nata Shop. It makes a wonderful gift for a young reader in your life who likes magic, who likes whimsy, who likes fairy tales, or you can buy it for yourself. I have had many adult readers tell me how much they really enjoy it and what a comforting book it is. You can find it at natasuit.com/shop, or if you would like to read it before committing, you can find it as a webcomic at 7inchcare.com. Although keep in mind, both volumes have a lot of extra goodies, so it is well worth purchasing the books if you like the comics. So I look forward to seeing you guys again really soon. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and hopefully this review was helpful in helping you guys make art a habit. Bye guys!